Hello, this is the video for the tile maps and camera lesson that we talked about in class. I'm making it into a video in case people want to review it for any reason. I just did the movement and animation video, so I've done literally nothing to this project since then. So that's coming right after that. So we have the sprite that can run around looking pretty cute. I love pixel art. So let's get into making the camera follow the player and adding some environments around, because that's when it's really going to start to look like a game. So as always, you're going to use the class assets. If you have a tile map, or if you like making environment art yourself, feel free to do that, or whatever you find on the internet. It's all going to be the same exact steps pretty much. So canvas, open class assets, that's what I have here. I'll just go to the very beginning. For this project, we're using the top down folder, assets top down, and then tiles top down. So if you want to use the same one that I'm going to use, I'm just going to use this grass tile set, but all of these will eventually work pretty much the same. So I'm going to download that, open Unity in my tile sprites folder that we made in the first lesson. I'm going to go to my downloads folder and drag that tile set there. And then we're just going to repeat the same steps that we did for splicing the layer. So select the tile set, go make sure the texture type is sprite 2D and UI, sprite mode multiple, pixels per unit. You can see in this title it's 16 by 16, so I already know it's 16. I'm not going to explain all this stuff over again because we just did that in the last video. Filter mode, point no filter, compression none, apply. Click the sprite editor button, slice, automatic grid by cell size. So 16 by 16 should look good. And you can see, like, if I were to use each of these tiles as a brush stroke, this would be the perfect brush size because each tile fits perfectly into a red box. Slice, hit the slice button, hit the apply button, and then we can cancel out of that. And now if we hit the arrow, we can see our tiles are perfectly sliced. So essentially, if you just know what the resolution of your pixel art is, I'll just slice it in that same resolution. Let's make a tile palette for this. Or I guess first let's make the grid in our scene. So let's, in the hierarchy, right click anywhere, go to 2D object, go to tile map, and then make a rectangular tile map. So 2D object, tile map, rectangular. And then that created a grid with a tile map child. I'm going to name the tile map, I'm going to rename it to ground. I'm going to press Control D and make another ground layer. I'm going to call that one ground 2. And that's just because I want my ground and then I want another layer for things like grass and flowers and stuff like that. Duplicate ground 2 and call it solid objects. All right, I'll be more specific, I guess. I'll call it trees and rocks. And this is for all the objects that I want to have collision enabled on it. It's got to be on a different layer. And I'm actually going to make a trees and rocks 2 layer. So I can have different layers of that. So on the trees and rocks layers, we want to go to the inspector and add a tile map collider, because like I just said. And so add the tile map collider 2D. So that's going to have collision. And then also add a composite collider 2D. So the tile map collider adds the collision, and the composite collider is what we can use to, instead of add, like, let's say if we were going to make a wall, instead of there being a collider on each individual tile, it would combine that wall into one collider. So it's way better for processing. Basically, you need the composite collider. And then on your tile map collider 2D, check the used by composite collider. And then just add those two things to, so we added a tile map collider 2D and a composite collider 2D. Add that to the other one as well. And make sure you check to use by composite on every layer that you want to have collision on. And added a rigid body 2D as well. All right, now we are set up. We are ready to go. So let's create a tile palette. So I'm going to go to Window, 2D, Tile Palette. And then I'm going to shuffle it next to the inspector. So it's up here. That's typically where it goes. I'm going to click on this drop down that says no valid palette and then select create new palette. I'm going to name it grass palette for nice grassy objects. And then I'm going to hit create, save it in the tile sprites folder. That's fine. And then here we have a new palette. Doesn't have anything on it. In the inspector, you see this drag tile sprite or sprite texture assets here. Here we could just drag our sprite sheet there. Make sure that you successfully split your sprite sheet before you drag it there though. So if you don't see this arrow and you don't see all these little tiles here, rewind the video and slice it up correctly. I'm going to drag it in there. I'm going to make a new folder. I highly recommend making a new folder and calling it tiles for your individual tiles because it's going to create an object for every single tile. So you want to hide that in a separate folder. It looks like this. All these tiles here. Good. It's not, for some reason Unity is, sometimes you have to close this, and if you want to expand the grid, so I'm gonna close tab, clicking on these three dots, and then I'm just gonna open it again. So Window 2D Tile Palette. Drag it there. And then now I still can't make it bigger. Why can't I make it bigger? Now it's too big, Jesus. Oh, that's fine. Okay, we got it to work. So this is basically it. So if you start drawing, like if I wanted to draw a grass patch, one thing I noticed, okay, so one thing is it's on top of the player. So let's fix that first. We do that with sorting layers. So if I click on my player and go to the sprite renderer, the renderer is what's rendering the sprite. You see on the tile maps, you have a tile map renderer. So back to my player, if I go to the sorting layer parameter in the sprite renderer and click on the default dropdown, I can add sorting layers. Basically here you want a layer for all the types of objects in your game that you want to have on separate layers. So hit the plus button in the sorting layer panel. I'm going to make a new layer for my player. Make a new layer for the ground. You're going to have a new layer for like trees if you want. Layers for NPCs, layers for enemies. Layers for everything, right? We're not going to do that right now. I want my player to be at the top, pretty much. And then I can click on my layer again and change it from default to player. Now you can see my player is showing up on top. Set the ground to ground, trees to trees, trees and rocks too. You set that to trees and then just raise the order and layer to something like 5 or just something higher. So it'll appear on top. Same with ground. The other thing that I noticed is that these these blocks are really big compared to the player. So instead, one way to fix that is find your player sprites and go to the inspector. And if we want to make the player bigger, then we would make the pixels per unit smaller. So even though this is a 64 by 64 player, I'm going to pretend that it's like 32 by 32. I'm going to type 32 and hit apply. So I just did that for the diagonal sprites, also to do it for the basic sprites as well. 32, and then my player got bigger. That looks a lot better. You could also do that for your tiles, but don't, because if you click on your base tile thing, and actually let me show what happens, and I want to make it whatever, a different size, then you can see they like shrink. So your tiles PPU actually must match its original resolution, which is in our case is 16. Then switch back to the tile palette and let's just show like an example. Ooh, what the? All right, let's if you click this, you can make a whole bunch. This, you can just play around with this for a while and you'll, get the hang of it. I'll just make a little path for him really quickly. map. One thing that's important to remember is if you want, you see here we're on the ground layer, so he's not going to collide with the ground. If you want to add things that he collides with, you have to change this drop down from ground to like trees and rocks. Then make sure you're on the brush tool so it shows the whole thing. So he's actually going to run into these. And then you want to have trees on top of those trees like this, you just have to switch to your other tree layer. And then if I want to have like grass that he doesn't collide with, I'll switch to ground 2 layer. All right, so I also want to show how to like a faster way of building out scenes. But first we have some scripting to do. So let's go to the scripts folder. Let's find those assets in Canvas. So assets, class assets, asset scripts, top-down scripts, part 2, Tilemaps and camera controller. So let's start with the camera. Open it, Control A, select all, Control C, copy. Open Visual Studio, open your camera controller, or you can just open it from here, camera controller. Control A to select all. You must select all, and then Control V to paste over everything. We're getting an error because we don't have this method in our player controller yet, and it's trying to call that method. So let's go to player controller and then just paste the player controller in. So this is the updated player controller. All we did was add a method and a line at the top. But the easiest way, depending on what class you're watching this video in, is just Control A, just copy everything, and then just paste it over everything. So Control A, update the entire script. And what we added was this set bounds method, which is setting, it's taking the tile map that we will set in a second, and it's making it so the camera does not go beyond the limits, the boundaries of the tile map. Yeah. And that is what it is. It's actually doing that here in the camera controller script. But we are setting those boundaries on the player controller. But that stuff isn't really super important. The most important thing is in the late update. We're giving it a reference to the player, and it's setting the position of the camera to the position of the player. So the camera's following the player. So file, save all, go back to Unity. This is important. Do not set the camera controller. It needs to go to the main camera. I'm going to click on the main camera in the hierarchy, go to my inspector, and press add component and add the camera controller here. I see sometimes people set the camera controller on the player. They put the player, the scripts, the objects that the scripts are on matters. So you'll see once you add the camera controller to the camera, there's a parameter here, this serialized field. This is just like a public variable, a tile map. It says none. The tile map that you want to put in there, these are our tile maps here. The one that you want to drag into this slot is like the big, like bottom layer that's going to set the boundaries for the level. So it'll be our just normal ground layer. It's that layer that we painted all this grass on. I think if this is too small, I think it throws some errors because I think that's happened in the past. So you just make sure that it's a decent size. Like your base ground is a decent size. I think if it's smaller than the view of the camera, then it throws some errors when it tries to set the boundaries and stuff. Or this should be more than enough. All right, let's look at our player controller really quickly. All right, let's save and see what happens when we press play. All right, so the camera's too close, and all of our things that have colliders on them are falling. Let me back up a little bit. I guess 5 was good. So the reason everything is falling is because those tile maps that we added the collider to added the rigid body as well, as we noted, which also added physics. If it added physics, it's going to fall. So we have to set the gravity scale on the rigid body 2D component to 0 for both of our colliding layers. So that should be good now. Hit play. And this looks a lot more like a game, but I'm not colliding with anything. So let's figure out why that is happening, because I don't know why that's happening. I can see the collision is on top of these trees, but the player isn't colliding with them. And that is because we did add collision to the player. So let's do that. For a top-down game, a circle collider 2D should be fine. Make sure it's the 2D one. And then usually when you're doing games like this, you want the collider to be a little bit smaller than the player, which feels the best. So in the circle collider 2 component, I'm just going to drag the radius down. Not that small, something like that. See if there's any more problems. All right, so that's pretty funny. So everything is floating around when I run into it. On the rigid body 2D, let's constrain some values. So on the player rigid body 2D, open this constraint setting. And we want to freeze only the rotation, because we want to move the player on the X and Y, but we don't want the player to be rotating around like it was. For the trees and rocks and all that, we can freeze everything. So go on the hierarchy, click on your trees and rocks, and just in the rigid body, freeze X, Y, and Z for all that. All right, now everything looks good. Everything's functioning. It's starting to look pretty good for the amount of time that we have put into it. Pretty cool. All right, one more cool thing that I don't have time to show in class a lot of the time, but it's if you're going to be like working on a large scale pixel art game, it just saves so much time and it's so easy to do. Our rule tile. So if I go to my tiles folder, tile sprites folder, and it's basically going to make a tile that paints itself, so you don't have to click on all of these individual tiles. Like if you want to make a path, you could just click and it's going to paint itself. So let's just show what I'm talking about. In tiles, I'm going to create tiles, 2D tiles, rule tile. So 2D tiles, rule tile. Name it RT underscore dirt. So we're gonna make like a dirt path. Go to the inspector, and we're gonna make some rules for these tiles. So I'm gonna open up my sliced tiles. I'm going to set the default sprite so that I can see it on my tile palette later. And we're gonna start with 8 rule tiles. So in the number of tiling rules, I set it to 8. And what we're gonna do here is basically set the rules. So it's gonna be based on if there's a tile to the left, then I'm gonna show this tile. If there's a tile all above me, then I'm gonna show this tile, stuff like that. So let's throw in all of the dirt tiles. So the blank one, this one. Let's do the side ones. The bottom one. Actually, where's the other side one? Right here. And then the bottom one. And then also these corner tiles at the bottom. Or I think I might need 9 actually. And then I can't remember off the top of my head what exactly these look like. So I have this project where I did it before, but it's, you can see, you click on these little grid boxes, and with the green arrow, it means there's a tile on that, in that direction of this tile. So if everything is green, that means there's tiles surrounding this tile. So wherever, if you look at our tiles, if there's something on every side, then we want to display the dirt tile with no grass showing. If there's, for example, nothing on top, then we'd want to show this tile. If there's no dirt on top, then we want to show the tile with no dirt on top. That's probably the best way of looking at it. So this is the dirt rule tile. Wherever there's grass, there's going to be an X basically, like that. And this is something. This is like the worst thing for my brain. This kind of stuff, but what are the diagonal tiles? What do those look like? Okay, they look like that. Oops. Okay. And then you could make it more complicated with like little turning tiles and things like that. But that's good for now. This is our rule tile. As long as it looks something like this, I'm gonna go back to my tile palette. Make this smaller, and then drag the rule tile that we made somewhere inside of your tile palette. This is how we're gonna paint with it. And if you want, you can hit this little, what is this? This pencil thing, and then make it a little bit. Actually, oh no! Click your tile, your rule tile in your palette, then hit the pencil, and then make it a little bit bigger. Make it like 3 by 3. You see it like drew itself right there. That's basically what we're gonna do. So I'm gonna hit this brush, and then if I draw on my scene, it's drawing itself. And then I could also make a rule that would draw this tile here, but I can't remember all of I can't remember what that looks like right now. Do we even have a tile for like those pieces? Maybe it's this one. Oh. I don't know. Anyways, that's how you make rule tiles. So that's it for this video. Next, we'll be moving into making dialogue, which is really cool. This is a very, very simple system that, dialogue is usually a very complex thing. And UI. So we'll make some NPCs next. But that's it for now.